Ideological clashes had nothing to do with it. How should they be resolved in a polycentric world? And how would the situation in Ukraine be resolved? Its different poles would test out the situation of the Ukrainian conflict for themselves. These potential pressure points, rifts that exist in their own regions, and then the collective response would be much more responsible and reasonable. At the basis of resolving would be the understanding that all the participants of this complex situation have their own interests. They're grounded in objective and subjective circumstances. They must not be overlooked. Efforts of all countries in their quest for security and development are legitimate. Of course, this applies for Ukraine, for Russia, and for all our neighbors. It's the states of the region who should have the final say in creating the regional system. It's these countries who have the best chance at agreeing on a universally acceptable model of cooperation because it affects them directly. It is of their vital interests. For other countries, this situation in Ukraine is a bargaining chip in a different, much larger game, their own game. And generally, that game has nothing to do with specific issues of countries, or in this case, for that country or those countries involved in the conflict. It's just a pretext to solve their own goals as well as to profit from war. That's why they showed up on our doorstep with NATO infrastructure. For years they sat idly by, gazing at the Donbass tragedy, the genocide, at the extermination of Russian people at our ancestral historical lands that started in 2014 after the bloody coup d'etat in Ukraine. In contrast to this behavior that was demonstrated by Europe and, until recently, the US, is the conduct of the global majority states. They refuse to take sides. They aspire to truly contribute to the creation of a just world, and we're grateful to all the states who in recent years have taken genuine effort to try and find a way out of this situation. These are our partners, the founders of BRICS, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the Belarus, North Korea. These are our friends in the Arab Islamic world. First and foremost, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia in Europe, and many African and Latin American countries. Unfortunately, so far we haven't been able to stop the hostilities, but the responsibility for that lies not on the majority for this inability, but on the minority, first and foremost Europe, who continue to escalate the conflict. And I believe there is no other goal over there. At the same time, I believe that goodwill shall prevail, and we have no doubt about this. I believe that the situation is changing gradually in Ukraine. No matter how brainwashed people may get, there are still some shifts in their ideology, and in other parts of the world as well. At the same time, the phenomenon of the global majority is a new development in the international life. Allow me to say a few words about that as well. What is its purpose? That the overwhelming majority of states is aimed at implementing their own civilized interests, the main of which is its balanced progressive development. And it seems that it should be natural, that's how it's always been. But in earlier eras, the understanding of these interests was distorted with morbid ambitions, with selfishness, with the influence of expansionist ideologies. And now, the majority of states and nations, that very same global majority, understand their authentic interests. And most importantly, they feel strong and confident enough in order to uphold these interests despite the external pressure. And I should add, by promoting and defending their interests, they're ready to work together with their partners. That is to say, to translate international relations, diplomacy, integration into the source of growth, progress, and development, the relations within the global majority. is a prototype of political practices necessary and effective in a polycentric world. This is pragmatism and realism, rejection of bloc philosophy, absence of rigid, dictated commitments, models where there are senior or junior partners. And finally, it's the ability to align interests that don't always coincide, but at the same time, they usually don't contradict one another. So the absence of antagonism is the main principle. We see a new wave of de facto decolonization that is gaining momentum, where former colonies, aside from statehood, also gain political, economical, cultural, and ideological sovereignty. And in this context, another important date is very important to note here. We celebrated 80 years since the creation of the United Nations organization. It's not just the most representative, universally political structure of the world. It symbolizes the spirit of cooperation, alliance, brothers in arms that helped in first half of former century to unite our efforts to defeat the greatest evil in history, the merciless machine of extermination and enslavement. And of course, the decisive role in this joint victory belongs to the US. Just take a look at the number of victims of the anti-Hitler coalition and everything will become clear. The UN, of course, is the legacy of victory in the Second World War. To this day, it is the most successful experience of creating the international organizations through which we can resolve the most urgent world problems. And we often hear that the UN system is paralyzed, that it's in crisis. It's become the common position. Some even go as far as to say that it has become obsolete and it should be radically reformed. Yes, of course there are a lot of issues in the work of the UN. But we do not have a better alternative than the UN. We have to admit that the problem is not